Hey, warm and friendly hello! Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN family of podcasts. We've got an absolutely excellent podcast for you as we've got another conference preview edition, as today we head out there to the MEAC, one of the traditional HBCUs, and it's always a lot of fun looking at this conference. As I always like to say, money is money. It doesn't matter if you're betting on Duke versus North Carolina or if you're betting on NC Central versus Howard. It's always a lot of good, clean family fun there, and Herbert Seward, who has joined me last few seasons to break down this fine conference, he is going to be joining me once again. In segment number 2, we're going to be taking a look at all 8 teams. He does a really good job of just being able to go in depth with these rosters, looking at some of the non-Division I transfers, as well, especially the guys that they come up from the non-Division I ranks, as you also have some non-Division I HBCUs as well. So he's going to be joining me there. He does a great job with so many different podcasts. He does a great job of looking at this league in general. So very excited about that. In the final segment, I'm going to get you guys my projector or finish for the MEAC. And if you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have 1 or 2 ways we'll fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, letters EM, naming does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is via an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. While I did not get in any Twitter/X questions, everything is powered by EdgeBoost. EdgeBoost is making sure that bettors are able to have access to their funds whenever and wherever they want. With EdgeBoost, 100% of gambling transactions always get approved, and when you go to edgeboost.bet, put in that promo code of Greg, G-R-E-G, as that'll get you a $1 for $1 match on your first deposit up to $25. And how about if we get down to business and we take a look at a MEAC where the 2-point shooting defense was really the big whoa with regards to this conference. You're going to notice that there's a real lack of big men when it comes to the MEAC that are able to be super duper dominant. That's why it was very impressive what we saw out of South Carolina State last season. They had quite a few big men down low that were able to do a pretty solid job of holding up, playing some nice defense. That's why they were one of the bigger surprise teams in that conference, because you just run down the list of these teams that they just weren't able to guard inside the arc. It was pretty rough to say the least, and it was headlined by Maryland Eastern Shore, 361st in all of college basketball in terms of opponents' 2-point shooting percentage. NC Central was 356th in terms of opponents' 2-point shooting percentage. Delaware State was 346, so that was a big giant issue for them. So you had a lot of these teams that they just weren't able to do a good job of being able to guard inside the arc, and when it comes to compensate, just a lot of issues with regards to this team. I wish I could put it any other way, but they were one of the least efficient offenses in all of college basketball, 364th in the country in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. Maryland Eastern Shore had a little bit of company with them, as they were about 356th in the country with that regard as well. So you had a few up, down, all-around teams. Now you've got a few teams that have really emphasized guard play and a lot of 3-point shooting. That is headlined by the fact that Howard has been a really good 3-point shooting team over the last few seasons for the Bison of Howard. They were once again 43rd in all of college basketball in terms of their 3-point shooting percentage. NC Central is a little bit of an interesting team. They do a lot with regards to their guard play. They were about a country average team, 184th in the country with regards to their 3-point shooting percentage, but a pretty efficient offense that didn't turn the ball over, and there was lots of volatility with these teams. You either turned the ball over a ton or you didn't turn the ball over at all, so there wasn't really a whole heck of a lot of in between there. Like with NC Central, they were doing a great job of being able to generate turnovers themselves. They were a top 35 team in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis, so their calling card last season was doing a nice job of being able to win that turnover battle. Now, they themselves were about 306th in the country in terms of turnovers on a per possession basis on offense, but you go down the list of these teams that they just weren't able to take care of the ball, and it was a little bit grody for them, and that is headlined by the fact that you had this team clocking in at number 359th in terms of turnovers on a per possession basis, and compensate just need to be a little bit better there. And Howard, they were able to find a lot of good 3-point shooting looks, but that always comes with a lot of turnovers as well, 356th in the country in terms of turnovers on a per possession basis as well, so had a little bit of an issue there. Maryland Eastern Shore was about 327th in the country there. South Carolina State 330th with regards to turnovers on a per possession basis. So you do have a lot of teams in this conference that are also top 50 teams with regards to turnovers on a per possession basis. And any team that's able to rebound typically has a lot of value with regards to this conference as well, because there are a bunch of teams out there in the MEAC that were not great in terms of disallowing second and third chances, headlined by the fact that NC Central 363rd out of 364 teams in terms of offensive rebound percentage. They allowed opponents to grab 37.3% of their missed shots as in offensive rebound. Coppin State, again, it was just a rough season for them. They were 350th with this regard. Howard was 345th. Maryland Eastern Shore was 343rd. So you had a lot of teams that they just very much weren't able to box out. They allowed a lot of second and third chances, and that's a big reason why South Carolina State was able to provide a little bit of value last season. Now, they were a little bit of a better offensive rebound rate team, but still, for South Carolina State, they were 260th in all of college basketball, much better than what you saw from a lot of these other teams. And a team like Norfolk State, they were 354th in the country with this regard, and they were really one of the top teams in the conference as well. So that goes to show you just how difficult it is to be able to disallow second and third chances. Delaware State, they were 281st in the country with this regard as well. And then that comes into play with regards to the betting trends as well, because you do have a lot of teams that they play very up-tempo in this conference. You do have some of the fastest teams in the country, and that did lead to quite a few overs. We'll get into that in a minute, because Howard, always a team that they like to play fast, they like to play frenetically. They weren't as fast last season as they have been in a few past years, but Howard still a team that they like to run it and gun it. They were 52nd in the country in terms of total possessions per game last season. South Carolina State was a very interesting team in which they had a whole is greater than the sum of its parts approach. They were able to do essentially hockey-style line changes. They were 37th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. Delaware State was 26th in the country with this regard. Morgan State is always a team that typically likes to play very, very up-tempo. For Morgan State, they clocked in 15th in all of college basketball with this regard. Norfolk State is always a team that looks to buck the trend a little bit. They were more around 217th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. So you did have a lot of teams that they were looking to bounce. They were looking to go very, very fast. And for Coppin State, well, frankly, because they weren't able to get a whole heck of a lot going, they were 145th in the country in terms of total possessions per game, because they just had a tough time getting into their sets in general. And if you're taking a look at what you all got in terms of the betting trends with regards to this conference, it was very interesting, because you do have a lot of these teams when they are playing these bye games, when they're playing these games on the road in non-conference play, that they are getting about 100 billion points, and there's not a ton of travel within the conference. Obviously, outside the conference, you're going to have a lot of travel. Some of these teams, they play pretty much like all but one of their games in the non-conference portion of the season on the road. So that'll take quite a bit out of them. But if you take a look at how these teams fared when they were on the road, it very much was indicative of the fact that they were a little bit outgunned. Only two teams were able to cover over 50% of their games on the road. Norfolk State, 11-5-1 against the spread, and South Carolina State, 9-7-1 against the spread. Howard and NC Central, 5-9 against the spread on the road. Coppin State, 8-10 against the spread on the road. Same goes for Maryland Eastern Shore. And then Morgan State was 7-8 against the spread on the road. Delaware State, they were 7-7. So honestly, not too bad there. You had quite a few teams below 500, but it's not like they were a complete whiff or anything like that. The big thing was the underdogs were really able to cash in this conference, as the lone team that covered fewer than 50% of their games as an underdog was Howard, 5-10 against the spread as an underdog. Delaware State, Coppin State, and South Carolina State were all 500 teams, and then Maryland Eastern Shore, 13-12-1 against the spread as an underdog. Norfolk State, 8-2-1 against the spread as a dog. Morgan State, 14-8 against the spread as an underdog. NC Central, 9-7-2 against the spread as an underdog. And if you take a look at just what happened in conference play, you were seeing these underdogs being able to rise up, with South Carolina State going 11-4-2 against the spread. Howard was just 5-10 against the spread. They were a favorite in a lot of those games, couldn't come through. Delaware State, 6-9 against the spread in conference play. Morgan State was able to go 11-5 against the spread in conference play. And again, Coppin State, rough year for them, but they went 8-7 against the spread in conference play, and Norfolk State 7-9-1 against the spread. So those spreads were starting to get a little bit too demonstrative, a little bit too large. And then when you take a look at the totals out there in the MEAC, I mentioned it, you have a lot of teams that they like to play very, very brisk and up tempo, and that's why all but two teams played more overs than unders. Coppin State, 13 overs, 15 unders, and a push. Maryland Eastern Shore, a very demonstrative under team, 9 overs to 18 unders, but NC Central, 21 overs to 9 unders. Delaware State, 17 overs to 9 unders, 18 overs to 10 unders for both Howard and Morgan State, 18 overs, 14 unders for South Carolina State, and then Norfolk State, 17 overs, 15 unders. And if you take a look at the way that things were really run in conference play, it was an overpalooza for all teams except for Maryland Eastern Shore. It went 4 overs, 11 unders in conference play. In conference play, you had 4 different teams hit at least 64% of their games to the over. South Carolina State, 11-6 to the over. Howard, 10 overs, 5 unders, 11 overs, 5 unders for NC Central, and then Delaware State, 11 overs to 4 unders. Meanwhile, in non-conference play, things were a little bit more stagnant, a little bit more in line, though. You did have two very demonstrative teams, Morgan State, 9 overs to 3 unders in non-conference play, and NC Central, 10 overs to 4 unders. Meanwhile, Howard, 8 overs to 5 unders in non-conference play, 9 overs to 6 unders for Norfolk State, and then you did have 3 teams have more unders than overs. South Carolina State, 7 overs to 8 unders, Maryland Eastern Shore, 5 overs to 7 unders, and Coppin State, 8 overs, 5 unders, and a push. So those are the betting trends and the styles of play that we've got in the MEAC. How about if we take a look at all these rosters and take a look at the incoming pieces with one of our good friends, Herbert Seward. He does a great job over at HBCU Game Day and so much more, and he joins me next right here on Cuts Because Soups with myself, Greg Peterson, now a part of the Beast and Family Podcast, the MEAC Conference Preview Edition. And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Cuts Because Soups with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the Beast and Family Podcast. This is the MEAC Conference Preview Edition, and we've got Herbert Seward aboard. He has joined me the last few years, taking a look at this great game of college basketball. This man does a little bit of everything on both the football and basketball side of things, of taking a look at these HBCUs. He is the host of the HBCU Hoops Weekly Show / podcast. I know he does great work over at the HBCU Digital Network as well. You're able to catch him on Fansided here with a few articles as well, and you're able to follow him on Twitter /X at HHL Seward, the number 3 altogether. And Herbert, it's great to have you aboard. Thank you.
Hey, thanks a lot, man. Thanks for having me back. It's always a blast being on your show.
It is always great to have you aboard, and let's get down to business and let's talk about these teams because we've got a lot of fun to take a look at. And the one team that I'm just not sure what we're going to be able to get much out of is Coppin State, because Coppin State is just not returning a lot from last season, and let's call it what it is. It's been a rough run for them over the last few seasons. They had the coaching change from Juan Dixon a few years ago, and they're still finding their sea legs after that. They're probably going to be relying a lot on Khalil Horton along with Cam Sparrow this season. So take me through this Coppin State team, one that it looks like they're going to be bringing in a lot of non-D1 guys to try to hold down the fort.
I think that's a very accurate assessment. Larry Stewart and staff, anybody that's familiar with Coppin State, Larry Stewart is kind of a legend in that part. He was part of Fang Mitchell's last teams that really, were dominant in MEAC play. He was part of the team that upset South Carolina way back when in the NCAA tournament. He's been trying to retool that Coppin State program in that image. They're going to be relying on a lot of transfers from Division II, as well as some freshman newcomers that we really don't know what we're going to get, but, have come with some really good accolades from the DC metro area, from the Baltimore area. So it's going to be really interesting to see what kind of product they have. One loss within conference, and I think you'll be able to, we'll talk about this a little bit later on as we talk about one of the other schools, was Ryan Archie. He was one of their more promising guard prospects, and he transferred in conference. So it's going to be really interesting to see who runs that point guard slot for them.
Yep, it is going to be really interesting because that's a spot that they've needed filled, quite frankly, for the last few years. So with Coppin State, they are going to be a team of a little bit of mystery this year, but we'll see what they're going to be able to produce. And I feel like that's going to be the same for Maryland Eastern Shore as well, because KC Shaw was really the heart and soul of that team. Now, it looks like they should be getting back Christopher Flippin, who was pretty flipping good down low, 9.9 points, 5.5 rebounds per game, and Michael Teal coming in should be able to help replace a lot of the boosts that you got from KC Shaw last season. I think it's going to be up to the ancillary guys to be able to step up a little bit more, like Joseph Lusardo, who comes on over from Concordia Irvine, who is a pretty versatile player.
Yeah, I agree. I think Michael Teal is the big name here. Anybody that's familiar with MEAC play last year, he was a real integral part of what South Carolina State was doing last year. Anybody that saw South Carolina State last year, they were incredible at times during the course of the year. Extremely tough defensively. Those guards were, and Teal was a part of that rotation, really tough as nails guards, two-way players, effective on both ends of the court. And I think what Coach Cleo Hill Jr. is trying to do is kind of, again, rebuild that roster in the image of what he had down at Winston-Salem State at Division II level in the CIAA. Pride themselves on tough defense, being able to, really be efficient on the offensive end of the court. And, Keytron Shaw was a big loss. Anybody that's familiar with what they were doing last year, he was their offense. Incredible offensive player, one of the MEAC's best last year. in that regard. Teal will probably go a long way in replacing a lot of that production, but I'm really excited to see exactly, what this, Maryland Eastern Shore product is going to look like, because he's really been, at work on the trail in terms of recruiting and in terms of really filling the portal to fill roles that, quite honestly, they were really missing a lot of last year.
Yep, absolutely. They were missing some of those roles last season, and they just needed a little bit more depth, in my opinion, last year, too. And we'll see how they're going to be able to do with that regard, as we do have Herbert Seward, who does such a great job covering all things HBCU sports, joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And I think that this is another interesting team. It's NC Central, as they did such a great job of being able to force turnovers last year. They obviously were a little bit rough with regards to their two-point shooting defense, but they go within the conference. They bring in Jonathan Dunn, who was very good over at Coppin State with about 9.5 points per contest. Kyrick Davis is a guy that I'm very excited for. He comes on over from West Georgia after he was a double-figure scorer as well. And Lavelle Moten is just a guy that I always trust. And I remember he was the AAU coach of John Wall way back in the day. So, this guy has such great ties. And I feel like they've done, once again, a good job of being able to reload after they lost much of that backcourt from the offseason.
Yeah, absolutely. And that name that I mentioned earlier in regards to Coppin State, Ryan Archie was one of the better freshmen in the conference at Coppin in that role. He's going to be filling a role in that North Carolina Central backcourt. And I think that's incredible. Anybody that's familiar with, Coach Moten and the job he's done there, he's, really had a penchant for developing backcourt talent. And Ryan Archie, DC Metro area kid again, 5'10", right at 6 feet, but an incredible point guard in terms of his decision making, in terms of, just getting the spots on the court, getting, people. He's really, one of the better pure point guard prospects in the conference. So it's going to be really, really interesting to see how Moten uses him in that rotation. I am a little concerned, though, about replacing some of the firepower that he's had at some of the swing positions. Po Boy King in particular. That guy was a walking bucket, and he transferred in the offseason. So I'm really, going to be interested to see how he mitigates some of the transfers that left his program with some of the more visible replacements. I think you're absolutely right in terms of Jonathan Dunn. I think he's going to go a long way to replacing, some of that, scoring, that scoring production.
Yep, absolutely. And I think that he's going to be a lot of fun to be taking a look at. And for Jonathan Dunn, I think that he's going to be such an integral part of this team. As joining me right here on the show, we do have Herbert Seward on Coast to Coast Hoops taking a look at the MEAC. And how about if we dive in on this team? As South Carolina State was that classic whole is greater than the sum of its parts team last year. They were pretty much playing a 10-man rotation. They had all sorts of depth that allowed them to be very successful out there in the MEAC. And I think that's going to be interesting to see how they work things this year, because I do think that the loss of Michael Teal is pretty big for them. But that said, they bring in a guy in Jaden Johnson, who he was good at the point guard spot for them last year. He was able to do some nice production as well. They retain quite a few of the guys, like Florian Tanby is going to be back from a season ago as well. This team just had so much depth, and I don't know if they're going to quite be able to duplicate that from a season ago, but the fact that they were able to retain as many pieces as they did, and they still have quite a bit of that rotation, I think is massive.
Yeah, it's huge. But I think there's one other guy that was really the centerpiece of that, center Drayton Jones. That guy was tough as nails. Anybody that, like I said, a lot of people that saw South Carolina State last year, they gave everybody everything they can handle. When they went on the road to both the University of South Carolina and the Xavier out of the Big East, really gave them fits all the way down to the wire, made the MEAC race an extremely tough one for both Norfolk State and Howard. They were arguably amongst the top 3 teams in the conference the entire year. And that had a lot to do more with just the style of play that they had, just extremely tough defensively. They made you earn, pretty much everything in half court. Getting shots off against those guys, especially if you're a guard or a forward, was really, really tough. They got a lot from Omar Krosky, part of that guard rotation. Really interested in seeing again how they replaced some of the scoring that they had with Michael Teal, him transferring within the conference. But the actual team philosophy that Coach Martin has, I think that is something, how much of that they retain is going to be really, really interesting to see. My assessment, I think they do. I think what we saw last year wasn't an aberration. It's, Coach Martin's personality, how he wants to kind of impose the game, on his opponents according to, what South Carolina State basketball is. So it's going to be exciting seeing how that plays out.
Yep, it is going to be very exciting to see how that plays out. And when it comes to Morgan State, it's going to be really interesting to see what they do for this upcoming season as well. Because with Morgan State, they're a team that they're a pretty high-flying offense. They're a team that has been a little bit, shall we say, up and down over the last few seasons. But having a guy like Rob Lawson in the backcourt, I think is really going to be able to help them out. And then Marlon Harris was limited to just 12 games last year, but in that 12-game sample size, really liked what I saw out of him. You've got just a lot of guys in general, like an Alfred Worrell, that I think have a lot of upside. And for Morgan State, it's been a little bit rough for them on the defensive side of things over the last few years, but I do think that they can get things figured out, and I do think that this could be a solid year for them.
Yeah, when I look at Morgan, and I kind of view Morgan as like the biggest enigma in the conference. There have been nights, I know of, again, people that watched the MEAC last year, saw Morgan just be world beaters against, opponents up to the competition like Norfolk States and the Howards and the Centrals, and then come back and just disappear on some nights. Offensively, they relied a lot on Cam Hobbs and that guard rotation. He's gone now. But Walter Peegs Jr., who's a JUCO transfer, along with Alfred Worrell Jr., those guys are poised to replace a lot of that production in the backcourt. I think, again, the biggest thing, and I think you touched on it, was their defensive consistency and toughness. I think a lot of times during the season that really failed them at times. And I know Coach Broadus is, somebody with his pedigree that has traditionally prided his teams on being able to rebound, being able to really manipulate the glass and limit teams defensively in that manner. And it's going to be important to see if they get post players and post replacement for that post production from that aspect of the game. I think some of the JUCO people that they're bringing in, quite frankly, have the capability of doing that. I know there's one recruiting miss that I'm really, really shocked that both Coppin and Morgan missed, and that was Marcus Jackson, former 4-star guy, team thrill guy out of the D.C. metro area in Baltimore that ended up going to school at Division II CIAA Virginia State. And, the guy's a legit, MEAC, all MEAC caliber talent that just kind of got away from under the nose of, the Norfolk States, the Morgans, the Coppins, and even Howard. It's going to be really interesting to see, what Morgan brings in, because I know there's still some movement in the portal as of this show that we still aren't really privy to until it completes. I'm just as curious as everybody to see, what Coach Broadus and staff have, cooking up, before the advent of the season.
Yep, I am as well, because with Morgan State, it does feel like they've got quite a bit of upside out there in the backcourt. Could maybe use a little bit more of something down low, and we know that this team always brings in some good transfers, and they do once again this year. It's Howard, as Eddie Turner missed last year due to injury. Now he's going to be out there after 2 years ago. He was really solid at Montana State. He's averaging like 3.5 assists, 9.5 points, relatively solid three-point shooter. They're going to be looking to Antonio Chull, a 6'9" big man down low. I know that he played at Rutgers before absolutely dominating at the junior college level last year. Cam Gillis is a solid guard that comes in from Lehigh as well. I take a look at this bunch, and I feel pretty good about Howard and what they're going to be able to provide on offense. It's always, again, the question of what are you going to be able to get in terms of the actual defense of this team.
To be quite honest with you, I think one big thing that you didn't mention was the return of Bryce Harris. I think Bryce Harris for Howard has been the heart and soul of that team for the past 2 or 3 years through, in terms of Blakeney's tenure there, in terms of the success that Howard program has had, since he came on as head coach. Anybody that's not familiar with Bryce Harris, 6'4", 6'5", interchangeable from between guard and small forward positions, and just big, strong body, can score in a lot of really, diverse ways. I mean, I love Eddie Holland's acquisition. There's a sleeper guy that I want to kind of bring to people's attention, and that's Cedric Taylor from, Division II Morehouse. He's a transfer. 6'5", again, extremely versatile guard guy that can play multiple positions, 1, 2, and 3, and he's an extremely smooth offensive player. He was amongst the all SIAC offensive players last year in his conference at Division II level for Morehouse, and I think he's going to have a real impact for Howard. Ultimately, the biggest concern for Coach Blakeney's squad right now, again, is size, rebounding, and really getting a lot of offensive production, from spots 3 through 5. Right now, I think with some of the acquisitions being there, some of the people that have already been there that are expecting production, like AJ Magabor, he came in, he was an international import that came in with a lot of potential and hype, and people are going to be looking for him to kind of step up. I'm really excited actually to see what the product is here. And I think we're going to have some other surprises in terms of roster acquisitions that are coming from the WCAC and coming from some of those prep leagues in the DC metro area that we don't know about yet. So, I've been trying to touch my feelers and inside the Howard camp for like the last couple of months, and they've been kind of tight-lipped. So it's going to be really interesting to see what the final product is there. But I'm really excited, especially, the transfers that are coming in. They are extremely talented offensively. I like what I see coming in there, and I think it's going to really manifest itself in their final product as the season starts.
Yep, it is going to be really interesting to see what all happens there, and I think that it's going to be a really fun team in Howard this year. They always put on a great show, so I'm very excited to see what we're going to be able to get out of them. And then these guys have been the stalwarts out there in the MEAC over the last few years. It's Norfolk State, and I think that I think that we can expect a lot more of that as well. Dion Wright Ford, who comes on over from Texas A&M Corpus Christi, absolutely love his game. Elijah Jamison, he has played at Milwaukee, he's played at UNC Wilmington. For Wilmington, unfortunately got hurt last season, but that's a guy that I'm pretty fired up about as well. Devin Ellis, obviously he knows all too well about the MEAC as he was for Maryland Eastern Shore playing down low for them a few years ago. And I just take a look at this team, and they just feel like the most complete team in the conference, in my opinion.
Oh, I fully agree. And I mean, look, Norfolk State still has the services of Robert Jones, and that staff is a testament to, the AD's commitment at Norfolk State. In my opinion, one of the best mid-major coaches at the D1 level as a focal point for the MEAC. And I think, case in point, you look at what he's done over the past couple of seasons in terms of retooling rosters, taking transfers, from other programs. The Carolina schools have been good to Robert Jones in terms of transfers. Schools like Rider, I know Christian Ings was a slam dunk in NCAA three-point slam dunk fame last year. One of the best, point guards in the MEAC has seen in recent memory. And I think, you're going to see a lot of the same. I think the transfer class that he has coming in for the portal has just as much potential to, just keep the standard of Norfolk State basketball where it is as they did last year. I know that there have been some losses in terms of transfer to other programs, but the reality is, Coach Jones does such a good job in terms of filling holes, in terms of filling needs for the identity of the program that he has. And, I see nothing different here. I think head and shoulders, I think they're the best team in the MEAC, and it remains to be seen whether or not anybody else is going to compete. But that's why we play the games, and that's why the season, when the season comes around, it's going to be really exciting to see what that product is.
Yep, it is going to be really exciting to see what we get out of Norfolk State, because just year in and year out, it always feels like that coaching job with Coach Jones and company, it's always very much top-notch, and I do think that that's going to be a lot of fun to be able to dive in on. And we've got one last team to cover, and that'd be Delaware State, a team that did a solid job, in my opinion, down low, and they bring back Olsen Andrews, a 6'10" big man that he's not going to go out there and give you like 100 billion points or anything like that, but pretty rock solid down low. I do think that Ponce James is going to be an interesting guy in the backcourt as well. I love what he's able to bring to the table. You got Kareem Watson, who they don't retain Kasim Watson, but they do bring back his brother from a season ago as well. And I do think that for Delaware State, they're going to be a very rock-solid team down low. I think the big question mark is, what are you going to be able to get out of that backcourt?
Yeah, I agree. Last year, Delaware State was kind of an anomaly as to what they normally have been under Stan Waterman, is that they were an extremely explosive offensive team last year. And again, that's kind of been, the exception to the rule for Stan Waterman teams. Most of those teams that he's had since he's been at Delaware State, and those teams have been really tough on the glass, defensive and offensive glass, and they've been tough defensively. Last year was kind of the inverse. They lose a lot of that scoring, so I would imagine that you're going to see a reversion to what those Waterman identities are in terms of his squad. Really tough rebounding the ball, really tough half-court defense, limiting a lot of transition opportunities. They're not going to get out and run as much as they did last year. Again, it's going to be really incumbent on that staff to replace the offensive firepower that they had, particularly in the backcourt and at the small forward position. Martez Robinson and the likes of him are not there anymore. And for a long time, they've been such stalwarts for the Delaware State program. It's going to be a challenge to replace him. Now whether they can, I think Stan Waterman has done a heck of a job recruiting not just the state of Delaware, but the Philadelphia area. That's where he got the Newton twins from. And I don't have any doubts about him replacing that type of talent when he's able to be as successful as he has been recruiting those specific areas. It's just, we're just going to have to wait and see. I think the ceiling for this team is competing for a MEAC championship. The floor for this team could be middle of the pack. We're just going to have to wait and see exactly what we see when the season starts. But I wouldn't bet against Coach Waterman, to be quite honest with you. I think out of all of the coaching hires that have happened for the MEAC over the years, he has been amongst the most prepared, from season to season that I've seen, outside of the top 2 or 3 and Coach Jones and Kenny Blakeney. So I'm really looking forward to it. And I think, just as a conference as a whole, I think the balance and the parity in the conference now is amazing. And it's something that the MEAC should really be proud of.
Yep, it should be proud of it because the MEAC has been such a great product over the last few seasons. It certainly is providing some high-level basketball, and obviously what Norfolk State has been able to do has been amazing. But what else is amazing is all the great work that you're doing, Herbert. I know that you're hard at work taking a look at all things college basketball. I know that you do an incredible job dedicating yourself to this game that we all know and love, and you also do an amazing job on the college football front as well. So love to give people at home know what's all on tap for you and how people are able to follow along on social media and other platforms.
Oh, absolutely, man. First and foremost, a huge thank you and big shout out to the folks at the HBCU Nightly Network, of which HBCU Hoops Weekly is a part of. A co-host, Coach Lynham, the crew at HBCU Nightly, the Erica Lees, Joshua Sims, and the rest of the crew there. For folks that follow me on Twitter, and yes, it's Twitter, it's not X, it's Twitter. I can be seen, my feed is HHL Seward III. HHL Seward III at twitter.com. Like, I'm on there every day in terms of just relaying news, recruiting information for both Division I and Division II HBCUs. Also, I'd like to really implore people that follow my stream to join the HBCU Hoops Weekly Substack. That is something that is new as of this summer. I am going to be doing my best to relay all sorts of pertinent, nice little gems and jewels of recruiting information, portal information as it relates to HBCU squads, in the MEAC, the SWAC, our independent squads that occupy the OVC and the CAA, as well as our Division II brethren. So join the Substack. You'll be seeing a ton of content come out there. And also, last but not least, the HBCU Hoops Weekly website. That's at hbcuhoopsweekly.com, and the HBCU Hoops Weekly podcast, which can be found on YouTube and is also a part of the HBCU Nightly Network. So if you go to the hbcunightly.com website, you'll see all of our archived episodes of HBCU Hoops Weekly for the first 2 seasons there. And stick around, man. The 3rd season is going to be awesome. So for everybody that has, really blessed us and following us, man, we much appreciate it. And thank you, Greg, for having me on. This has always been a blast in terms of being on this show. And, just delivering, the information to audiences that aren't familiar with the MEAC product. Hey, man, it's some of the best mid-major basketball out there. For those folks that are listening to this show, this guy is solid. He's a real deal, man. Just do it.
I appreciate you, my man, and I always do try to give as much proper shine as humanly possible to these schools because you're able to make money regardless of which team it is that you bet on, whether it's out there in the MEAC, in the SWAC, whether that be what you're taking a look at in terms of the power conferences. They're all playing great basketball. They're all competing hard, and always love to be able to talk about the MEAC as Herbert. He does such an incredible job taking a look at this great game that we all know and love. So big thanks to Herbert for joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the Beast and Family podcast. And coming next, it is that time of the podcast. I give you my projector or finish for the MEAC. Here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the Beast and Family podcast. Great to be able to get Herbert Seward aboard. He does such great work over at a variety of different platforms, taking a look at this great game of college basketball. He does an absolutely amazing job of taking a look at these great teams out there in the MEAC. I know that he always joins me yearly for the SWAC Conference Preview Edition, so we're going to need to get him back on as he does great work over at HBCU Hoops Weekly and so much more. So a big thanks to Herbert for joining me in the last segment. Now it is that time of the podcast. I give you my projector or finish for the MEAC. Now do note that because I am doing a conference preview podcast today, that means that I'm going to skip over any news and notes that we might have seen in college basketball on Thursday. If there's anything that we did see, I will polish it up on the podcast tomorrow, so have no fear there. I want to make sure that these conference previews always have the sparkle and shine that they do deserve, though. So we are going to dive in right now with dead last in my projector or finish. That unfortunately is Compensate, and Compensate, they just don't have a lot of pieces back from a season ago. Cameron Sparrow along Khalil Horton, they're really going to need to shoulder the load for this team, as you did have Horton be able to give you about 8 points per contest. Sparrow was able to chip in there a little bit over a steal, 5 points per contest, but now you're looking at someone like a Mekhi Nelson who comes in from the non-Division I ranks over at American International College, where he wasn't even doing a lot for them as well. You bring in a freshman in Nelson Lazana, who he's 6'8". He should be able to give the team a little bit of size, but what are you going to be able to get out of a non-Division I guy like a Darius Leonard, who he's been banged up over the last few seasons as well, so you've got a lot of question marks with this team. Hassan Perkins is someone that's going to need to step up as well. He comes in from Maryland Eastern Shore, but I just don't see too much of a path forward for Compensate, having such a lack of Division I experience and just not really headline guys even from the non-Division I ranks. So that last my projector finish, I'm going to be going with Compensate. At number 7, with regards to my projector finish, it's going to be Maryland Eastern Shore. You lose Casey Shaw from a season ago. Now, I do think that bringing in Michael Teal is actually very rock solid for the team. Michael Teal last season was over at South Carolina State, a team that was very much a whole is greater than some of its parts sort of approach team, and he did a nice job of running things there. He was able to average a little bit over 2 assists, 5 points per contest. Not going to go off and shoot a lot of threes, but then you got a 6'9" big man in Joseph Lucendaro, who he comes on over from Concordia Irvine, was averaging about 10.5 points, 4 boards. At 6'9", he's able to pop it from 3. Christopher Flippin was pretty flipping good down low. He was able to give this team right around about 5.5 rebounds per game, and then you're going to be looking to someone like Dorian Staples, who he's got a little bit of Division I experience. Trey Brown was over at North Carolina A&T, limited 10 games due to injuries, but he's a 6'7" wing with a little bit of promise as well. I do still think that for Maryland Eastern Shore, it's going to be a bit tough for this team to really find their way, as this is season number 2 under a new coaching regime as well for them, and that was something where they had to put that together on the fly, as it was late May/early June that Cleo Hill was hired on from Winston-Salem State. It really showed in the way that they played last season that things were a little bit more herky-jerky. You bring back Maurice Vassell, who I think showed a little bit of promise at 6'9" as well, but do think that it's going to take another year for this program to really be able to take off and get running. So Maryland Eastern Shore, number 7 in terms of my projector finish. And number 6 in terms of my projector finish, I'm going to be going with Morgan State. With Morgan State, I just always have so much question marks with regards to the defense of this team. Now, you do bring back a guard that I really like in Rob Lawson, and I do think that Alfred Worrell, who he comes over from Southern Miss, he was able to average about 5 points per contest for them. He should be able to be pretty rock solid. And for Lawson, 2.5 assists, 7.5 points per contest. They shoot 37.5% from 3-point range. He's going to need to take a little bit more ownership of the offense this season for a Morgan State team that they really did struggle with their perimeter defense last season. They were able to be a surprise, and they have gone at least 7-7 or better in the conference, and I believe now each out of the last 6 seasons, so they haven't necessarily bottomed out, but losing losing pretty much all 4 of your top 4 scorers from a season ago. That's a big giant issue for you. They bring back Marlon Harris, who he showed a little bit of upside at 6'10" last season. Harris, he was able to, in a 14-game sample size, give you about 4.5 points, a block, 3.5 rebounds per game. So the interior defense is getting a little bit better for the team, but they really lacked a lot of pizzazz in terms of the transfers that they brought in as well. Would have liked to have seen them bringing in a little bit more. Monik Lewell is someone that I feel pretty bullish about. He comes over from the non-Division I ranks, was pretty solid at the junior college level, and then Christian Meeks is someone who had 6'6". He's got a little bit of versatility. He was a very highly touted junior college guy as well, but that said, I do think that for Morgan State, they're going to suffer a little bit in the backcourt with it having to be Rob Lawson and not a whole heck of a lot else. So I do say they have a lot of size on their team. Most of these guys are 6'8" or taller, so that helps them out a little bit, but still going to go with Morgan State at number 6 in terms of my projector or finish. At number 5, I'm going to be going with Delaware State. For Delaware State, I do think that bringing back Ponce James along to Alston Andrews is a good place to be able to start for this team, and Ademir Santos is someone that comes on over from the non-Division I ranks. He's someone that I think you do want to be taking note of, because with Mr. Santos last season, he was able to, as a pretty highly touted guy out of Harcum College, average 13.5 points, 3 boards on 37% three-point shooting. Ponce James last year, he was able to make 44% of his threes. He's going to need to take a little bit more ownership of a bigger role, but then you've got Alston Andrews, who's able to give you about 4.5 rebounds per game. He's got some relatively good size. They were 60th in the country in terms of percentage of missed shots that resulted in an offensive rebound, so this is a team that understands Waterman. They do a nice job getting second and third chances. They do lose Kasim Watson to the transfer portal, but his brother Kareem Watson is still going to be in the fold for this team. Theodore Pendergrass, the third, he comes on over from the non-Division I ranks. He should be able to give you a little bit of help as well. And then Miles Webb, who is playing over at St. Francis of Pennsylvania, he's a little bit of an upside guy that I think is going to be able to add something as a 6'8", little bit of a joker wing player. So with Delaware State, I think that they finish right towards the middle of the conference. I've got them number 5 in terms of my projector or finish. At number 4 in my projector or finish, we are going to be going with NC Central. With NC Central, I do have some question marks in terms of how the backcourt is going to be run, but you do bring in Kyrick Davis. Davis was a nice solid player over at West Georgia last season. It was their first year at the Division I level, but I am for Davis. He was able to average about 9.5 points per contest, bringing in Jonathan Dunn as well from Coppin State. I think that he's going to be able to get her done. That gives you the size that was very much needed for the team. And last year, they're outside the top 350 in terms of opponents' 2-point shooting percentage, 9.8 points, nearly 4.5 rebounds per game. And then Deontay Johnson is a guy that has a lot of upside, who last season did a nice job of just being able to dole out the ball. 4 assists, 6 points per contest. I can never bet against LaMelo Moton finishing in the upper half of the conference, because year in and year out, he just gets his teams to fire on all cylinders. Last year was very much a down year for the team, going 6-8 within the conference. I do think that he picks it up a little bit more, but again, when you lose the likes of Perry Smith, Po Boy King, Keshawn Porter, your 3 double-figure scorers from a season ago, that does lead to a few question marks there, so it is very much a mix-and-match sort of team. Ryan Archie coming on over from within the conference as well should be able to help them out. He was over at Coppin State, and he was limited to just 3 games last season as a freshman, was able to show his worth, so I do think that for NC Central, the coaching job of LaMelo Moton will be just enough for the team to remain in the upper half of the conference. I've got them at number 4 in my projector or finish. At number 3, I'm going to be going South Carolina State. South Carolina State does lose quite a few guys from that pretty much hockey style that they had last season, as they were able to just interchange like 10 or 11 different guys. They had so much depth, and it's a big reason why they were able to strike fear into a lot of teams. But I mean, really the heart and soul piece of that was Drayton James, 13 points, block and a half per contest. He was by far the most dominant big man in the conference. He's now out of the fold, and you do lose so many of your top scorers from a season ago, so you're going to be relying upon Jaden Johnson, who was a part-time starter who was able to give the team 5 points, a little bit over 2 assists per game. Florian Tanabe, he is back after he was able to give the team 4 points, a few boards. He was also a part-time starter that was able to shoot in the mid-30s from 3-point range as well. I still think that they're going to have depth, but I just don't know if they're going to be able to play quite the same way that they were able to a season ago. That's a big question that is on my mind, but you've got Colin McKenzie, who's also back from a season ago. He was a nice role player for this team. Guys like a Kenny Gaines, who comes on over after he spent last season at the non-Division I ranks. I think that he's going to be able to make a nice impact with regards to this backcourt. And then James Merrill at 6'8", State has a little bit of versatility. He's back from a season ago as well. So I do think that South Carolina State, their overall style and their overall depth, even though they don't necessarily have that one main headline guy, is still going to be very rock solid this year. I've got them at number 3 in terms of my projector or finish. At number 2, I'm going to be going with Howard. And for Howard, the big key for this team is having Bryce Harris back in the fold after he last season just was unable to get out there on the floor. He only played in 7 games, and the season before, he was one of the best players out there in the MEAC. 16.5 points, 7.5 boards, shot 37.5% from three-point range as a 6'4" sort of do-it-all guy, and they're going to need it because for Howard, I felt like this year their transfer portal class was a little bit down from a few seasons ago, though Eddie Turner down for what? I absolutely love his game. He comes on over after he missed all of last season, as I believe he was supposed to be at Columbia 2 seasons ago when he was playing over at Montana State. This guy was very rock solid. He was able to chip in there 3.5 assists, shot in the high 30s from three-point range, over 9 points per contest. Cam Gillis, he should have a big role in the backcourt as well. 2.5 assists, 9.5 points, a little bit over a steal per game over at Lehigh 8 seasons ago. Antonio Chall, he was over at Rutgers to begin his career, went down to Garden City Community College last year, absolutely tore it up there. 19.5 points, 7.5 boards, a block and a half per contest. Travell Bryson, he was over at Vicenti's, which is one of the best junior colleges in all of college basketball out there in the great Midwest. Shot 44% from 3, and that's going to be big for a Howard team that they overall last season were 43rd in three-point shooting percentage in the country at over 36.5%. Now, they always play rough defense last year. They were 337th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, but I do think that the high-flying style, along with Harris being back in the fold, is going to keep this team towards the top of the MEAC. I've got Howard at number 2 in terms of my projector finish, and at number 1, it's just hard to go up against these guys. I've got Norfolk State there. As for Norfolk State, yeah, you are going to be losing a few guys. Like Christian Ings, it feels like, has been in that style for like 500 billion years. He spent a lot of time over at Norfolk State, but that said, you bring in someone like a Deontay Wright Ford along with Elijah Jamison to be able to bulk up that backcourt, and I think that these are just amazing pieces, as Norfolk State did a really good job of just being able to rebuild via the transfer portal. Jamison last season unable to get out there on the floor over at UNC Wilmington, but go back 2 seasons ago when he was over at UW Milwaukee, he was averaging 2.5 assists, nearly 9 points per contest. I absolutely love that part of his game. Deion Wright Ford is someone that is going to be coming in after he last season was able to have a really nice season over at Texas A&M Corpus Christi. He was able to give the team about 6.5 points per contest. Not necessarily a great three-point shooter, but he generates about a steal per contest. He's going to do a nice job on the defensive side of things for this team. And then Anthony McComb III, I think, is just such an interesting prospect as he comes on over after he was in the MEAC a season ago. And for Anthony McComb, he's a guy that I think is going to be able to do a rock solid job of just being able to bring a little bit of everything to this backcourt. Began his career at Bowling Green. Last year was actually at New Hampshire, where he was averaging 13 points per contest. Didn't shoot it well from 3, but he's able to give you a little bit of facilitation. Was a part-time starter last season when he was over at New Hampshire, so he was able to find his way there. And then for this Norfolk State team, they're going to be a little bit better on the glass with having Yilding, who's 6'9", doing a nice job down low. Javon Ellis, when he was over at Maryland Eastern Shore a few seasons ago, he was a 5+ rebound per game guy. And then you're bringing in Keontae Lewis. He was over at Wagner at 6'9". He should be able to do a nice job of being able to pull in there some rebounds. I have a little bit of question mark as to what he's going to be able to do in terms of his offensive game, but for Norfolk State, what they were really lacking the last few seasons was someone down low, and he's going to be able to provide that and then some with about 5 boards per contest as a starter over at Wagner last season. So I do think that Norfolk State runs this conference. I've got them number 1 in terms of my projector or finish, and that will wrap things up for the MEAC Conference Preview Edition right here on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. If you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever your podcast, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of 2 ways to be able to throw those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, letters EM, they mean does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. Other ways, find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. Big thanks once again to Herbert Seward. He does such an incredible job over at HBCU Hoops Weekly. He does a great job over at the HBCU Hoops Digital Network, Fansided, and so much more. Join me in the last segment. I'm coming at you guys every single day on this podcast, regular season and off season. We've got plenty more conference previews to do. Probably won't get one tomorrow, but you'll get a lot more soon, and I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you.